Good afternoon, everyone. Sometimes you need to keep the best to the last. We had some great speakers today, and obviously I'm not talking about the cocktail party at 6, but the speaker I'm about to introduce and I'm proud to introduce. I'm Frank van der Post. I'm the president of Atlantic Broadband, and I'm delighted to be here on behalf of Atlantic Broadband to support the International Forum of the Americas. As a top 10 provider of internet, TV and voice for homes and businesses in 12 states, including here in the Miami area, we know that customer needs and expectations for connectivity continue to evolve. That's why we continually work to anticipate these needs and bring advanced technology to bear on the challenges and opportunities before us. Connectivity is essential to daily living, but it's also an economic driver. So when we think about the theme of this year's forum, mastering the economic revival, surely economic vitality depends on readily available of high-performance communication technology that connects businesses, organizations, schools and citizens all over the world, including those in hard-to-reach areas, to everything that is important. Our success, and that of Cogeco, our parent company in Canada, in this very competitive telecommunications marketplace has been to innovate and evolve, trying new things, including reimagining the customer experience at every stage of the customer journey so it can be as good as it can be. We're doing that with new digital and virtual self-care options and by launching new services like fiber to the home and IPTV. We're doing it by delivering ever faster and more reliable internet speeds and by investing and optimizing the bandwidth of our fiber broadband network and investing in our people. That's why I was very excited when I learned I would introduce JB Bernstein. Because if success involves taking risk, thinking outside of the box, and trying new things, there is no one who does it better. JB has internalized his ethos throughout an extremely successful career. I had the pleasure of speaking with JB recently, and he said something that I think sums it up quite well. Sometimes, he said, we have to lose in order to win. You have to be more afraid of not trying than of failure. That's JB's story. When you look at JB's 35-year career, you see he's an entrepreneur, a problem solver, a risk taker, and with a huge successful career to prove it. He's Chief Executive of Officer NF3, CEO of Avisite, a drone inspection company. As founder and CEO of Access Group of Miami, he has represented some of the greatest athletes of all time, including Barry Bonds, Barry Sanders, and Emmett Smith. He co-created the $3 million arm contest in India, which led to 2 sports contracts for Indian players here in the US. His story was subject of a Disney motion picture starring John Hamm and a book published by Simon & Schuster. It is incredible, and he's not done yet. I know there are many more chapters to be written, so it's my pleasure to introduce JB to you today with a little help of this short video.
Hi, I'm JB Bernstein, entrepreneur, sports agent, corporate presenter, and of course, the co-creator of $1 Million Arm.
A new movie tells the real-life story of trying to find just one potential all-star, 8,000 miles from the nearest American ballpark.
Insane? Maybe.
Okay,
But this idea from sports agent J.B. Bernstein actually worked.
I'm J.B. Bernstein.
Bernstein, played by Mad Men's John Hamm.
The real J.B. is not a lot like me, first of all. He's a little bit different than I am. He's a big thinker, and is a very successful guy, kind of his own, off his own sweat. But has always been kind of an outside-the-box thinker.
It really is an amazing story.
$1 million arm is something you did as a sports agent looking for the next great pitcher.
The greatest pleasure in life is doing things that people say you can't do.
And so I said, you know what? I said, I bet you if I went to India to try to find a cricket player who could throw a baseball, we could find a guy. Number one, anything's possible, no matter what environment you're in. It's not that all the people who didn't think of it. It was the fact that I had the guts to do it. $1 Million Arm sure uses India and baseball as kind of a fabric to tell a story. But the story is not about India, and it's not even really about baseball. It's about the American dream.
Ladies and gentlemen, J.B. Bernstein.
Thank you so much, Frank. Thank you. Thank you. That's a really nice ovation. You guys know I'm not really John Hamm, right? I'm actually legally required to say that because we look so much alike. I'm supposed to laugh at that, buddy. No, I'm just kidding. So I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about my story, $1 Million Arm. And so every time I do one of these things, I always think to myself, what does what I do have to do with the audience? And what's really interesting is there are 5 themes in $1 Million Arm that kind of have governed my life. They're things I've stolen from really smart people, guys who own sports teams. And probably nothing could apply more to our times now, no matter what business you're in, than these 5 kind of precepts of what I see over and over again in successful people in business. So the first one's creativity. People say out of the box. People say this. But it's evolution. It's having an evolutionary thought process with your business and understanding that wherever you are today, that's not where you're ending. And anybody who thinks that that's where they're ending today, that will actually be where you're ending, because you will be out of business. Passion. Especially when you're starting something, people have to buy into you before they buy into what you're doing. They don't totally understand it. The people who work for you don't totally get everything. And so they have to buy into you and buy into your passion and your rolling up of your sleeves. When you see really successful people who've accomplished something from scratch, it's because they had passion that other people got infected by. Overcoming adversity. There's never been anybody successful in life that hasn't been kicked in the gut, that hasn't been told no, that hasn't been told their idea stinks or whatever it is. $1 Million Arm was actually an idea was told by baseball owners, 16 of them, that it was the worst idea they ever heard. My mom told me $1 Million Arm was the worst idea I ever heard. So overcoming adversity and the answer no is really important to success. Planning. If you don't plan, you're planning to fail. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on planning. Everybody here knows it's the worst part of any kind of the business process is planning, but it's really the key to success. And then the last thing is ethics. And you probably won't hear a lot of sports agents talk about ethics, at least not without some evasion. But I'm a different kind of sports agent and a different kind of guy. My grandfather, who shows up in this speech a couple of times, but he gave me a great piece of advice. He said, when I was a kid, he said, if you don't care about your ethics or about your work ethic, then you don't care about the world. And I said, what are you talking about, Grandpa? And he said, 95% of the people that you come into contact with are going to be people from school or work. And they're only going to judge you on 2 things. They're going to judge you on what you do and how you do it. So ethics is 50% of how the vast majority of the world is going to view you. Your family, sure, they get to see who you really are. They get to see you at the soup kitchen. They get to see you do all that stuff. But 95% of the people you meet don't see any of that. They see your work product and your work ethic. And so if you don't care about your ethics, then you really don't care about what people think. And I doubt there's very many of us in this room. So raise your hand if you ever had an idea that as soon as you saw it, somebody said, oh, why didn't I think of that, right? Why didn't I think of that? $1 Million Arm was the exact opposite of that idea. No one would have thought of this. Everybody thought it was the worst idea. Everybody I talked to, my buddy who's the head of EA Sports told me, JB, you're smart, you're creative, you're going to lose a lot of money on this. My buddy who is the head of Major League Baseball International, his job is to develop baseball internationally, told me that this was the absolute worst idea he ever heard. My mom, everybody, just, it was the worst idea ever. But I knew I had something, and I knew I saw something that they didn't see. So it all kind of began with an ending for me. I was recruiting a kid. I represent a lot of the top running backs in football, and at the time, the two top guys with Emmett and Barry. And this guy was coming out, he's a football running back, and he says, JB, I'm going to be the best ever, and you're going to be my agent. And I said, oh, great. All I need is $1 million. And I'm thinking, this is going to be the happiest client ever. I'm going to get him $5 million from Nike, $30 million from the team. I mean, this guy, he wants $1 million. This is going to be the happiest client I've ever had. And then I realized he wanted a duffel bag with $1 million cash. You know, no one needs to know about it. Apparently, I didn't teach tax law in this kid's university. But I always feel like, you know, what relationship starts off with extortion and ends well other than marriage? And so, don't tweet that if anybody, my wife follows my Twitter feed. So, no, seriously though, it sounded like a really bad idea to start a relationship. Give a guy $1 million under the table, behind the government's eyes. What was this guy going to ask me to do next? And the disillusioning fact here was that this 19, 20-year-old kid didn't think of this. Some other agent offered this to him, and now this was going to be a new barrier in my business. I was going to have to pay a kid who's never played a down of football an advance of $1 million to sign with me when I'm the best agent in the business. It seemed like a crazy thought, and I wasn't going to do it. So I'm sitting at the NBA All-Star Game. It's the only sport I won't work in. I love basketball. I don't want it to be my job. And I'm sitting there, and I look at Yao Ming, and I say, Yao Ming's made $2 billion in his career. $2 billion. His agent has taken almost, most of it's marketing, so his agent's taken almost 20% of somewhere between $1.3 and $1.5 billion. Emmitt Smith could have 55 kids, and I could never get to that number if they all consecutively broke the rushing record one after another. So I started to think about what makes Yao Ming so special. First athlete from a country with 1 billion people that made it in America, where that country of 1 billion people had the monetary way to be able to monetize sports. So I immediately looked to India, and I started to think, well, how can I find talent in India? And of course, I have to admit my big guilty pleasure, I watch American Idol. I love American Idol. It's one of my favorite shows, and it's embarrassing to admit that in front of crowds, but I have to, so you understand. I came up with the idea of basically doing American Idol, but instead of a microphone, I put a baseball in the guy's hand, and instead of a judge, I had a radar gun. But that was basically my concept. Give a kid a chance to win a lot of money, potentially be on TV. Lots of kids would show up. That had to be universal, and it was. In our first year, like I said, I spoke to 16 different owners. They all told me I was nuts. And then finally, I got into business with the minority partner in the San Francisco Giants. And literally 6 months later, I was in India and running this contest and starting this contest. One small piece of advice I give about Rosetta Stone is I did take Rosetta Stone Hindi, and it was a really bad idea. It cost me $750, and nobody in India speaks Hindi. They all speak English or 500 other languages, but very few people speak Hindi in India. And when I tried it on my cab driver, I land and I say to him in Hindi, hey, can you take me to the hotel? And he turns around to me, he goes, excuse me, sir, do you speak English? So if anything else, I saved you guys $750 if you were thinking about learning Hindi. When you get to India, I'd never been there. It was really interesting. It was a very different place. The street vendors there were crazy. They'd come up to your car with everything from balloons to the Harvard Business Review to water guns, Motorola phone chargers. And it occurred to me that this 5-year-old toothless kid has a better understanding of having a good variety in an impulse purchase situation than the guys who were working for me back in America. Pretty sad. I ended up finding 3 kids total out of 38,000 kids we saw throughout the country, 3 kids who could throw in the mid-80s, and actually only 2 of them came over to the United States. One of them was so disenfranchised, they couldn't prove he was an Indian citizen, although my attitude is, how'd he get there? You know, it wasn't like he traveled in from another country, but we couldn't physically prove he was an Indian citizen and couldn't get him out. The other 2 guys came with me, and I inherited 2 18-year-old kids. I was single. I didn't even have a plastic plant. I'd never had a girlfriend that lasted more than 3 dates, and I inherited 2 18-year-old kids who did not speak English. were completely, they grew up in villages of 1,400 people with rolling electricity. And so their first day with me in Los Angeles at USC was pretty interesting. I am not a good father. I'm much better now, but at this point in the story, I'm not good. So I take out a tennis ball and a flashlight, and I explain to these guys why it's light on this side of the country, on the world, and it's dark in India, and we can't call your parents right now. That was one of my great first days, and then I took them to Denny's because it's a picture menu. Boom, steak and eggs, both kids. And I'm thinking, steak and eggs? I'm like, you can't eat cow in India, that's really bad. But if I was 18 years old, halfway around the world, waiting for my parents for the first time, I would definitely get a hamburger too. And something, these kids are just like me, so we order it for them, and they're eating it, and they love it. And I mean, this is Denny's, so it's a steak-'em. This is not Ruth Chris. And they're eating it, and the kid turns to the translator, and the translator says to me, "The boys love this. What part of the chicken does it come from?" I know. 12 hours in, I've suspended their beliefs of the universe and damned them to hell. And they were much worse on the field. It was a total disaster. Like, they could throw fast, but they didn't know anything about baseball. They didn't have any mechanics. They didn't know the rules. They didn't know anything. It was a total nightmare. And a really important lesson here is that when you delegate to an expert, especially in an area I know nothing about, like teaching somebody how to pitch, just let them do it. So I shouldn't have been in Coach Tom's office every day after practice for 30 days going, "This is a nightmare, it's never going to work, I'm going to have to go back to India, oh my God, the food." And I'm thinking like, I can't believe this, these kids are terrible. He's like, just relax. And he talked me off the ledge. And after about a month, these kids started getting a lot better. I cheated like crazy, so I brought in a lot of help. I brought him to Barry Bonds' house. I figured he's a great hitter. He could teach them things about pitching. We pulled up in front of Barry Bonds' house, and they said, "Oh, why does Barry Bonds live in a hotel?" I said, "No, this is his house, not a hotel." They really enjoyed that. Randy Johnson came down to pitch with them and work with them. And for those of you who don't know, he's a lot like Rinku. He's a big 6'10" left-handed guy. So he was really able to help Rinku. And then I had to meet Chan-Ho Park, who was the first Korean baseball player. And he was talking to them about the pressure of being a player. And I thought this was such a great piece of advice. I always share it. Anytime you're trying to do something that's never been done before, anytime you're the first, there's only two things that matter: what it took to get to where you're standing and what it takes to make the next step. Everything else is noise. People over here think you're a genius. People over here think you're a moron. It's going to work. It's not going to work. And none of it's helpful. The only thing that's helpful is your plan. What you took to get to where you're standing and what it takes to get to the next step. It was probably better advice for me at this point because there was a lot of press about what an idiot I was over at USC trying to get Indian kids to pitch. And then Brian Wilson really taught them how to work out. So, I brought in as much help as I could. So November 5th, 2008 was the absolute worst day of my life. I screwed up. I had these kids set up at ASU. This ASU canceled for insurance purposes. And I thought it would be a good idea to set up a temporary pitching mound in a parking lot in front of Bed and Bath in Tempe, Arizona. It was not a good idea. It doesn't sound like a good idea now even. And when I do this presentation, it's really embarrassing because it was a horrible idea. And it was a disastrous result. They couldn't pitch. They barely got into the mid-80s. Their control was terrible, and it was a total nightmare. I spent the next 10 days begging, borrowing, stealing. I gave up Super Bowl tickets to a scout with the Pirates who ultimately showed up, and it ended up being a good investment because on November 14th, these kids came out at USC on their home field, and they were on fire, throwing 91, 94, curveballs, sliders, everything. They just looked like real pro pitchers. And it was the only time during this whole thing that it felt like a movie to me. That first pitch, like, hung in the air. When it hit the mid, it sounded like a thunderbolt. And it really, like in the movie, that's how they portrayed the scene. But in life, that's the only time where it ever really felt like a movie. But even with a great performance, you never know if you're going to get signed. November 24th, just 7 months from the day they stepped on American soil, not knowing what baseball is, not knowing the rules, not knowing anything, they were both signed to the Pittsburgh Pirates. And of course, they call to tell their parents, "We got to the Pirates, we got to the Pirates." And they look at me and say, "Where's Pittsburgh?" And I said, "Oh, it's so much warmer than Southern California, you're going to love Pittsburgh." Well, I had to get them there. So they had an amazing historical year. They arrived at Pirate City. They were inspirational for the team. The team had really been terrible. And having these guys in camp was really transformational because they didn't know anything other than to work hard. And all of a sudden, the other players are like, who are these guys? You tell them to be there at 6 in the morning, they're there at 5. You tell them to run 10 miles, they run 20. You tell them to take 500 at bats, they throw 1,000. They do everything. It's unbelievable. Who are these guys? And it really started to remind people about the preciousness of opportunity. And that's one of the coolest things is you don't know where it's going to come from in your organization, but that spark, that really unique differentiator could bubble up from anywhere. And in this case, the Pirates organization turned on a dime because of 2 Indian kids who could barely speak English, who had never pitched a single inning of organized baseball, even in their tryouts. They've never actually been in an actual game yet, and they've changed the entire team before it even starts. So 2009, Rinku makes the Dominican Summer League. He plays in the Australian All-Star Game, and on May 24th, he and Dinesh are invited to the White House. And theirs is the only Indian-born athlete jersey to be enshrined in the presidential archive. They got to meet Obama. It was pretty cool. I got married 2 days before this, so I flew out right after my wedding to the White House with these guys. And it was really an amazing thing to see these 2 kids from villages of 1,400 people with rolling electricity and have the President of the United States congratulating them. That was pretty incredible. Rinku made it beyond this. Dinesh made it 2 years in the minors. Now he works for me in India, and he helps run the contest which on goes. Rinku pitched for 4 seasons in the minors. He was 10-6-2. He had a really good career. He blew out his arm in AAA. They were bringing him up at the end of the season. They were going to give him 2 weeks at the end of the season. And in his last start in AAA, before they were going to bring him up, he blew out his Tommy John. Don't feel bad. Rinku, his dream has already been eclipsed a zillion times. And so in rehabbing, he got into the gym, got up to 290 pounds, and calls me up and says, hey, you know anybody at the WWE? So you can now see Rinku. He's part of the #1 WWE Indian tag team. It's like 300 pounds of solid muscle. It's a long cry from pitching. And of course, agents make no money off wrestlers, but he's like my son, so he finally made it as a pro athlete. $1 Million Arm Season 2, we saw 100,000 contestants. We had one guy come to play for the Nationals in the minor leagues, and he got homesick and went home. Season 3 will kick off in 2022. It was supposed to be 2 years ago, and then COVID kind of crept up, and then last year. But we're pretty certain that we'll do, and we're going to see over 500,000 kids in India. And Major League Baseball is the title sponsor. The guy told me I was a moron and that this is the worst he now pays me to run this contest. Nice, right? Hollywood. So the movie's another great story. The movie producer told me this was the worst idea he ever heard. He's an old friend of mine, and he produced Invincible and Miracle and all the sports movies we love. And sure enough, when the kids got signed, he calls me up. He's like, this would be the best movie ever. I said, you told me this was a terrible idea for a contest and a worse idea for a movie. And he goes, I didn't know the kids would get signed. For the 119,000 women who bought this book and thought it was a book about John Hamm and Mad Men, you cannot have your money back. Just saying. It's still a good book. But if you do want to sell a lot, I highly recommend putting John on your cover if he'll let you. So I'll go through these slides really quickly. People always ask how close was the movie to real life. So you can see here, this is where Rinku won the finals, and they're pouring the Gatorade, who's our only sponsor, on him. And he turns to me and goes, I thought I won. And I said, you did win. And he said, why are they pouring perfectly good juice on me? He thought it was like some kind of, he didn't realize, like in America, I guess in other countries, they don't pour fresh food on you when you win things. At USC were training, and Dinesh really thought the Domino's pizza guy was a god. And he would give him the money and say, thank you, pizza god, because he couldn't understand how the pizza would just show up as he liked it. There they are with Chan Ho Park. They lived at my house and were always in either casino free stuff or Barry Sanders or Bond stuff. So if somebody would walk up to him at USC and be like, oh, I love Barry Bonds. He'd be like, yeah, who's that? He's like, no, me Rinku. And they're like, no, and you're sure, oh, this guy, yeah, he's good. the Thanksgiving dinner in the movie actually happened, but it was a little bit later, and the kids did not cook. Brenda cooked, but it was a whole bunch of people from the movie, and it was really, really nice to have them back. And then they really did get kicked out of the hotel, so they didn't understand how the electric eye would work, and so they'd be there, and you'd get in the elevator with them and be like, hey, check out this magic door. And they would keep doing it until the alarm went off, and then they would just press all the buttons to try to turn the alarm off. And that happened 3 times in the first hour they were in the hotel. So I inherited them. The most crazy outcome is I got the girl, which is definitely bizarre. That never happens for me. But I married the woman from the movie, Brenda, and we have an 11-year-old daughter named Delphine. And, it's amazing about deals, right? Every deal changes you financially no matter what, better or worse. Some deals you can tie in a charity or some kind of community reinvestment, and that's awesome. But it's exceedingly rare, and only one time in my life, where you get a deal that changes who you are fundamentally, how you see the world, who you want to be. And my only advice is, as uncomfortable as those deals are, hang on tight and see them through, because to me, the greatest accomplishments I've ever made are not financial. The greatest accomplishment of this specific thing is what I'm about to talk about, which is, I'll get through a couple. So they went to Hollywood for the first time, and then their first signing ever from Under Armour, they get all this free stuff in the mail, and they're afraid to touch it. And I said, what's the matter? And they said, sir, we can't afford all this stuff. And I said, they're your sponsor. They give you this stuff for free. And they said, oh, great, let me tell you my brother's sizes. They had become very American by this point, by the way. And then we'll go here. So they went to the White House, as I told you. There's some pictures with them and the president, which is really cool. First Indian to pitch ever in a pro baseball game, Rinku Singh, July 4th, 2009. Dinesh, the first one to record a strikeout that game, and the first Indian to ever win a match. Approximately 1 year from him landing on American soil, not knowing what baseball was, he beat my Yankees. Rinku Singh was the first Indian to ever win a minor league baseball game. It's absolutely amazing. Think about what he did in a year to go from not knowing about the sport to going up against pro players and winning a game. It's totally amazing. Dinesh won his first match August of that year. So this is the amazing part of Million Dollar Arm, and the only part of this story that matters is these kids come from villages where about 750 million Indian people live in villages. And they go from village to village now with the movie, telling their story and inspiring kids and saying, what's the gift that God's given you that you can then step out into the world and do things? Because until Rinku met me, I once asked him, I said, what's your dream? You know, when you're growing up, you have a dream, right? What do you dream about? He said, sir, in India is 2 things. Dream, maybe you make the army, but you're going to be what your dad is, or nothing. That's it. And so it was so crazy to me, because in America, there's an example of almost anybody on the planet that you want to be who came from bad or worse circumstances than you and became president or the head of a company or a pro athlete or whatever it is. And there's literally very few examples of that in India. So the thing I'm probably most proud of is that Dinesh is part of our group, and he goes from city to city and village to village, presenting to kids, inspiring them, telling his story, and trying to get the mental capital that lives in these 750 million people to be able to connect with the rest of the world. And it's one of the greatest outcomes. I started Million Dollar Arm as a for-profit venture to get a Yao Ming, and what it's become is kind of a social experiment, which is pretty cool. So worst idea in the world ever was in 127 countries, including Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera hates America, me, baseball, everything, but they did an article on this. To hear Diane Sawyer doing the lead-in to my ABC piece saying, I don't know why somebody hadn't thought of this sooner. I'm like, really? Because the people at ESPN who you own told me this was the worst idea they ever heard 6 months ago, and now you want to know why it didn't happen sooner. Typical. So, military style. Tell you what I'm going to tell you, then tell you what I told you. Creativity, evolution. It's the cornerstone of the success of our business. There's no way to be successful without evolving. Especially, you've seen COVID, and we've talked about this a lot today, about this being the new normal. There's no such thing as a new normal. It's going to be a constantly moving target that we're going to be chasing. We're going to be chasing consumers. We're going to be chasing trends. We're going to be chasing investments. We're going to be chasing everything, and it's all going to be moving because things are going to start evolving at an incredible pace. And I already thought things were going pretty fast because I started my career with a yellow legal pad, 5 people sharing a secretary, and 2 things you'll probably have to Google called microfiche and whiteout. And so I feel like things are really moving fast now. Passion. You got to believe in it. You have to believe in it. No one will follow you if you don't really believe it. Overcoming adversity. It was probably my dating life that set me up for hearing the word no a lot. But I'm kind of different. When I hear no, I don't think no. I think that's the start of the negotiation, not the end, because you've listened to my pitch, you've heard what I've had to say, and you didn't hang up on me. So you're in the market, you just didn't like my pitch. You know, so I always think of no as like the first step of going towards a yes. It's probably the scariest thing for all of us is having our idea kicked down, having somebody tell us no. But no is the beginning, not the end. You got to remember that. Plan, plan, plan. And then the last part is ethics. I didn't know that not cheating with an athlete would lead to all the greatest successes in my life. I wouldn't have cheated anyway, even if I did, but irrespective. That's an odd outcome for an agent, but I'm really proud of it, and I hope that you guys think about that too. So I leave you with this last quote. If you're going to spend your life running, you might as well be chasing your dreams. That's my motto, and that's what I believe. I'm really excited to be part of this today. Thanks to Stephanie and everybody for having me, and thanks to Frank for introducing me. And if anybody has any questions, I'll be over there. But thank you very much for your time today.